So at 50 years old, I was done. I was completely done. Sold everything, walked away from a career, good pay. I was done. And in this video, I'm going to share with you actually what it cost me, my sacrifices, what I've lost, and what I've gained, and break it down a little bit more clearly, why this decision happened. Most people assume I was, running from something. And I wasn't necessarily running. I was just finally seeing something a little bit more clearly, or definitely in a different perspective. Each item had a kind of a story attached to it, what I'm having, what I'm hanging on to. And not that I was ever, materialistic and stuff like that, but I made a clear decision. I mean, I sold all my toys too. I had, a nice street bike, a Sea-Doo, a lot of stuff. That was it. It was all done. I think the biggest problem was, or the hardest one, was actually walking away from literally a few $100,000 bonus if I would have stayed. This was a very difficult decision. In this video, I'm not telling you that you need to follow those steps at all. It's just sharing the journey I went through and what happened on the other side of it. And maybe this can resonate with some people. It felt like letting go of a lot of the stuff. Each one had its own story attached to it, each object and stuff. It's a very hard transition. When people ask, do I regret it? Well, the answer usually surprises them, but there are stages. And here's what nobody really tells you about collecting things. At some point, they actually start collecting you. Each object will come with like a quiet little maintenance. You got your storage, you've got decisions to make, you've got security to be on top of. And owning things slowly turns into managing things. And this becomes a big, heavy burden as well, a silent one. I didn't notice the weight building because it's built very slowly. And it almost comes to a point where you think like it's not just building slowly, but it's almost like everything's a necessary step. These are all normal steps that's carrying this weight. And the collection becomes a version of identity that you feel like you're locked into. And again, these are things that you're probably harder to relate to until you actually step outside of that and be able to look in. And I think the hardest struggle in the beginning was actually walking away from it. I felt like I was really walking away from myself at first. And it was very disappointing. I thought, okay, this is where the regret came in. This is where the mistakes came in. Like I said, there was a big bonus I walked away from. It was a very good pay. There was a lot of side bonuses on top of that, comfortable living. But that feeling of walking away from myself at first, that feeling turned out to be the whole point of everything. And I think we all sort of come to that point for years. You genuinely believe the more stuff meant more, a more complete life, or at least a more comfortable or something like that, more convenience. When you start purchasing things, every purchase felt like a progress in time, that your time was well spent, all this, burning out hours or the overtime, or it kind of was a little trophy. You think, okay, I've done this on the wheel of life, and this is my proof I've done it, and that's the process, and it's all proper. And you start having a reason and a justification for almost everything you own and everything you go in debt for or purchase, or you kind of tell yourself, yeah, this is the reason. Then it's almost like that collection becomes part of you, like becoming someone. It's definitely your identity. And then I think to some part, the real sad part is nobody questions all of this, and you certainly don't question yourself when it looks like that's the part of success. This is the rule for success. This is what we need. And you don't really see that cost, because the cost wasn't really financial. The cost was flexibility, and I didn't notice it. I didn't notice the importance of that, where it was leaving. And somewhere in there, your possessions kind of stop representing your life and start anchoring it. Like it now gives you a commitment. It gives you that you have to stick around and do this. You have to show up every morning. You better make sure you're not late. You better not be sick. All these kind of things, because it's part of it anchors you into this whole system, and then when you have, the bigger decisions, they start out like to kind of get filtered through about what about my stuff? What about my lifestyle? What about all the accomplishments? I mean, I'm not done yet. The goal is still here. I got to move it forward. And so it's very difficult. And then you start to even imagine, okay, well, what about traveling? How can I accomplish this? And then you think about, well, okay, when can I retire? How soon can I retire? What does that involve? What kind of freedom will I have? When you think about just imagining the extra travel, it felt much heavier than it should be. It felt like, okay, I'm not even close to this. And then I think I don't know if you agree with me on this one or not, or where you sit on this one. It almost feels like you're making life choices based on logistics, not desire. And then the things I own were quietly kind of voting on my future, for lack of better words. And also, you got your cost of living. You got to just maintaining your baseline, your roof over your head. These are all huge burdens in a lot of ways. A lot of them are, of course, necessary. I think you very easily fall into a situation where you build a life that protects the collections instead of, the other way around. And having that moment, realizing, hey, something here is backwards. And in many ways, selling them, the hardest part wasn't selling the big stuff, okay? A lot of the small stuff, sentimental stuff, it has a very much so emotional weight. Making that clear decision, okay, I wanted to change my life. I want to be in a different direction. I want to try basically retirement early, or my lifestyle choices a lot earlier. The path I was going on, it was getting more unhealthy physically, mentally. And I thought, okay, how much value is the Sea-Doo, the motorcycle, these kind of things. So those were a little bit easier to let go of, because I knew that's going to open a different door. But as you get down that list, the smaller items, they start having much more memory to it. And in the very beginning, I didn't realize how much this would be difficult. And that reaction kind of taught me how I was actually to a lot of my items. And then you get to a point, letting go is not simply clear and simple, and I stopped pretending it was. And this was where, to be honest, in the beginning, this is what was very difficult. It felt like, okay, when you stop all of that and then you lose that high income and everything else, you start regretting, okay, you're looking around, you have less stuff, the income's not the same. You really go through, actually, I was looking at more at what I lost, not what I had potentially gained, because that was just a natural thing. This is what I spent decades building up. You never look at what you can gain. You're looking at what you got to protect, kind of thing. And when you kind of look at that, it's like going backwards. And this is the part I really want to share with everybody, because it was not that easy, and it was definitely hard. And if I would have been a braver person, it would have been a lot simpler. It was a choice that was kind of almost to some degree forced upon me. I didn't make this decision so lightheartedly. I wish I would have been a lot braver back in the day, because I spent quite a few years actually suffering emotionally on that moment, looking at everything that I don't have anymore. I mean, I had a very good career there for over 15 years. And like I said, it was going to be several $100,000 bonus by sticking it through. But I was completely done. I mean, I could not physically continue on. And I definitely felt like selling everything would be a loss, and was a loss. But it really turned out it wasn't. As I started going through some of this stuff, I felt a lot lighter than I expected. And the real important thing is it allowed me to actually experience going to another culture, going to a whole different lifestyle at a much younger age. And then what kind of opened up was more space, more actual physical, mental space, being able to breathe, being able to see things a little bit more clearly. This is one of the huge rewards, and has now been fantastic rewards. I wish I would have seen that at an earlier stage. And part of this video is for that reason. I'm sure there's many people that are faced with that I'm done feeling, I've had it. And they're probably a lot more brave than I ever have been in that respect. And so this is kind of like a video for that. And you start noticing how much physical energy objects start quietly taking away from you. And then that energy starts showing up elsewhere in ways I didn't expect. And that freedom, that wasn't really done from owning more. It was on the other side of actually owning less and needing less. This is the big one too, realizing that you need less. That's when the true freedom starts to open up. I think many of us spend decades and years chasing that more would finally be enough. That goalpost, okay, well, I'll finally have time to settle down, relax, and move on, and really enjoy it when I get to that stage, when I do this. And that's sort of the trap that I feel everybody falls into, enough never really arrives, no matter how much, you collected, no matter how much you've gained, no matter how much what the system is telling you should need or have or be happy at that particular stage. And the day I stopped feeling, things made me feel secure, and that was kind of like something that shifted. This was a much more profound experience. Kind of like security have been outsourced to objects the whole time. And once I took that back, the objects lose their grip. The whole system, the society of the way things are being done loses its grip. This is something completely unique feeling. The needing less turned out to be the actual goal the whole time. That was the goalpost that doesn't move. That's the one that you want. And just to be clear, this is not really about selling stuff, getting rid of all my stuff. It was more about selling the version of my life, that I already outgrew or now give the freedom and permission to. And I started realizing that collection was tied to a person I used to be, an identity, a thinking, a pattern that we're all kind of like somehow are accustomed to. This is the normal identity of life. Keeping it meant staying loyal to the old identity. And in an odd sense, kind of like selling it was the closest thing to give myself permission to change, to look at things differently. And it would be fair to say it wasn't really like getting rid of objects. It was more like getting rid of the script of life. And the script of life said, hey, success looks like accumulation. You need this. And while you need all these things, you need to make sure you're doing this pattern to continue, and you got to look at the next one. And letting it go made more room for a version of success that I actually wanted. And I would probably argue to admit that that's the success version that everybody does want. Now my life easily fits in a fraction of the space I used to be. It's just that simple. And quite honestly, what I own today, I could move in a single trip. I don't need to do any extensive planning, how to move now around. But there's a real sense of freedom with having that. So, the decisions now that used to feel so impossible, or maybe not impossible, but very overwhelming, like very heavy weight, now I feel very simple. It's very easy. And that's the type of freedom that allows you to look at change immediately without picturing logistics, without worrying about all the sacrifices and consequences with it. And that picturing of freedom that you can just do is a huge reward. And that lightness isn't just like a physical thing. It shows up on how I think, how I react. And definitely less stuff turned into more room actually in life, in living. I was actually letting go of things, but I actually was letting go of the life I thought I was supposed to want. Because we get bombarded with information daily. We're almost force-fed the things that we're supposed to want, how we want, what success is. It's always success from another version telling you this is how it's supposed to be, not giving us time to take a step back, breathe for a moment, look at what is my version of success? What does that mean? And that's when you start to realize the optics were really never the issue. They were just the evidence of a life I've outgrown without even noticing it. And selling everything didn't create the freedom. It revealed it. The freedom is within all of us. It's always there. It's the whole time we have it. It's just buried under the collection of things and the assumption of the path that we're supposed to be on, and that invisible contract that we have with the more we collect and the more that we feel that once I get there, this was what I obtained, this is the happiness that we need, this is what retirement will look like, or this is finally I achieved the goal. And I didn't lose who I am when the stuff left. In fact, more importantly, I grew into the person I should be when the more you have that space, that freedom, those choices that you can make for yourself. And you finally get to find out who you are without it, kind of thing. And it does open up the horizons a lot better. And it brought everything up to an earlier stage, because at that time, what really crossed for me was looking back. I spent a couple of years kind of like, it was emotionally difficult walking away from all of that. And then I realized, I wasn't going to even go abroad until 65. And here I am doing it at 50, going back and forth. And once I flipped that view on how I'm looking at things with less and being able to do this, and I looked at what I gained, my personal freedom, that's when it was really opened up. So I wish I would have been a lot more brave in the beginning, been able to experience those years right off the bat with a lot more joy. Now here I am 8 years later, and this is still, another 6 years away or so, basically, before retirement would even come into play. And I would still be on that. And I don't think my health would have maintained it. It was really wearing down with anxiety and so on and so forth. But there is like no regret now being able to look back, because I have that freedom. I am now in the winters, I'm enjoying the good weather, the better foods, and on a budget that is so much more affordable. It's easy to maintain. I don't need this big overhead. I don't need all the burdens, and you actually have time to live your life the way you want, kind of do what you want. So anyway, if this resonates with anybody and you want to have some questions here, by all means, leave them down. I'd like to engage in this kind of stuff. And this is what this channel is about, really, and guiding through it and sharing my adventures that I've gone through, how easy it can be going abroad. I'm not saying everyone needs to run abroad now, but this is what the tools I've used to have my life change. And if you're interested in that pattern, this is what this is all about. And I appreciate everybody being here, and we'll catch you on the next one.